In the quiet suburbs of Bridgeport, Connecticut, nestled on a small street named Lindley, a storm of terror was brewing. It was 1974, and what began as a typical life for the Gooden family would soon spiral into one of the most talked about paranormal cases in American history. A case so strange, so chaotic, that even the most skeptical observers were left speechless. This is the story of the Lindley Street Poltergeist, and how Ed and Lorraine Warren were dragged into one of their most disturbing investigations. Gerard and Laura Gooden lived in a small, modest home at 966 Lindley Street, with their adopted daughter, Marcia, who was just 10 years old. The family was quiet, religious, and never attracted much attention. But things started to change, slowly at first, then violently, after Marcia's pet cat died, an event that seemed to mark the beginning of the nightmare. It started with little things. Furniture would shift slightly when no one was near. Cabinets would open on their own. Objects would go missing and turn up in impossible places. At first, the Goodens tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind, maybe they just forgot where they put things. But what they couldn't explain were the banging sounds that echoed through the walls at night, or the crucifixes that would twist upside down on their own. As the disturbances escalated, they reached out for help. Police officers, neighbors, and even the local fire department witnessed some of these bizarre occurrences. A heavy refrigerator was said to have levitated off the floor. Chairs slid across the room. A television set reportedly fell over multiple times in front of police officers. The Goodens were terrified, and not just because of the events, but because no one could make it stop. The house on Lindley Street quickly became a media circus. Word had spread like wildfire. Reporters, photographers, and crowds of curious onlookers gathered outside the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural chaos. Inside, the Gooden family was unraveling. And that's when Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived. Ed, a demonologist, and Lorraine, a clairvoyant and medium, had already made names for themselves investigating the Amityville case and others, but Lindley Street would prove to be something different, something darker. The Warrens arrived with their usual tools, Ed with his firm Catholic faith and his relentless pursuit of demonic truth, Lorraine with her sensitivity to the unseen. They walked into the house, already charged with energy, and immediately knew that something was terribly wrong. Lorraine claimed she felt a malevolent presence, something inhuman. The energy wasn't tied to the house itself, but rather, to Marcia. As they investigated, they concluded that this wasn't just a haunting, this was a classic case of a poltergeist. The term comes from German, meaning noisy ghost, and that's exactly what this entity was. It fed off emotional energy, particularly the trauma and instability surrounding young Marcia, who had reportedly struggled emotionally since the death of her cat and had trouble adjusting at home and school. But here's where things get complicated. Police officers who had initially been firm believers in the phenomena suddenly began to change their story. After days of bizarre activity, one officer claimed he saw Marcia secretly tipping over a lamp when no one was looking, and from that moment, suspicion began to grow. Some investigators accused the child of faking the activity, calling it a hoax born of attention-seeking behavior. The media seized on this revelation. What had once been a chilling paranormal mystery quickly became a controversial scandal. Skeptics said it was all a fabrication. That Marcia, a lonely and troubled girl, had staged everything. That the Goodens, perhaps unintentionally, encouraged it. The press turned vicious, and the Lindley Street Poltergeist case was thrown into the realm of urban legend and mockery. But Ed and Lorraine Warren didn't agree. In their final reports, the Warrens maintained that while some activity may have been exaggerated or even faked by the child, much of it could not be explained by natural or human means. Lorraine was adamant that a dark spirit had latched onto Marcia, using her grief and emotional turmoil as fuel. Ed insisted that the debunkers were too eager to dismiss what they couldn't understand. They also pointed out that trained police officers had witnessed events they could not explain, appliances moving on their own, heavy furniture shifting, and items flying through the air with no visible cause. Was all of that staged by a 10-year-old girl? Or was something else at play? Even more chilling, after the media frenzy died down, the Gooden family moved away and refused to ever speak of the case again. Marcia was placed into psychiatric care for a period of time, and the house at 966 Lindley Street was eventually demolished. Almost as if it never existed. But the case never left Ed and Lorraine Warren. For them, it was a sobering reminder that the supernatural is not always clear-cut. That not every haunting is a simple case of ghosts and demons. Some are twisted knots of psychological trauma, spiritual vulnerability, and yes, sometimes deception. But within that chaos, the Warrens believed, there is always a grain of truth. To this day, the Lindley Street Poltergeist remains one of the most hotly debated paranormal cases in American history. Was it a hoax created by a troubled child? Or was it, as the Warrens insisted, a genuine demonic infestation, one that ended not because it was defeated, but because it simply moved on? In the end, the Lindley case reveals something deeper about the human condition, our desperate need to explain the unexplainable. To believe that if we just dig deep enough, we'll find the rational answer. But sometimes, the truth doesn't live in black and white. Sometimes, it exists in the shadows. Between fear and faith. Between grief and deception. Between this world and the next. And it is in those shadows that Ed and Lorraine Warren found their calling. The Lindley Street Poltergeist was not their most famous case, but perhaps it was one of their most important. A haunting not just of a home, but of a society grappling with the unknown. What really happened on Lindley Street? The answer, like the poltergeist itself, may forever remain just out of reach.